For 3 years, the most important mission in the Allied war effort had one brutal, unchangeable law. Your bombers would die before reaching their targets. Every raid into Germany meant watching fighters fall from the sky, counting empty chairs at dinner, and accepting that air superiority was something the enemy owned. But in 1943, one aircraft that everyone had written off as a failure was about to prove that sometimes the most revolutionary weapons come from the most unlikely places. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress earned its name through punishment, not protection. Bristling with machine guns armored with steel plate, designed to absorb damage that would destroy lesser aircraft. But all that firepower meant nothing when German fighters swarmed at 20,000 feet, 300 miles from the nearest Allied base. The math was unforgiving. American escort fighters had enough fuel to protect bombers for maybe 200 miles. Then they had to turn back, leaving the fortresses to face the Luftwaffe alone. What happened next wasn't combat, it was slaughter. German pilots knew exactly where Allied escorts ran out of fuel. They waited just beyond that invisible line, engines idling, watching American fighters peel away in frustration. Then they attacked. Bf-109s and FW-190s tearing into bomber formations like wolves into sheep. A B-17 carried 10 men. When it went down in flames over Germany, 10 families got telegrams. 10 chairs stayed empty. 10 futures ended in fire and smoke over hostile territory. The physical toll was staggering beyond comprehension. In 1943, the life expectancy of a B-17 crew member was 15 missions. They needed to complete 25 to go home. The mathematics were simple and horrifying. Most would die before earning their ticket back to America. Young men calculated their odds every morning, kissed photographs of sweethearts they'd probably never see again, and climbed into aircraft that might become their coffins. This wasn't warfare, it was arithmetic. And the numbers said America was losing. The trap went deeper than just missing escorts. The entire strategic bombing campaign, the plan to destroy Germany's industrial capacity and break its will to fight, depended on one assumption. Bombers could reach their targets. But without fighter protection deep into enemy territory, that assumption was killing thousands of airmen and accomplishing nothing. Every mission followed the same devastating pattern. Bombers would form up over England, hundreds of aircraft creating formations designed for mutual defense. American fighters would escort them across the Channel, through occupied France, toward the German border. Then, somewhere over Belgium or the Netherlands, the escorts would waggle their wings in farewell and turn for home. Their fuel gauges showed no choice. What followed haunted every man who survived it. The sudden silence on the radio as fighter protection vanished. The tense minutes of flying deeper into Germany, knowing what was coming. Then the first shouts, "Bandits! 11 o'clock high!" German fighters diving from the sun, their cannons turning aluminum and gasoline into fireballs. Bomber gunners fought desperately, their 50 caliber machine guns creating impressive streams of tracer fire, but rarely stopping the Luftwaffe's experienced pilots. The Germans had perfected their tactics through years of combat. They knew exactly where to hit a B-17 to kill it quickly. They knew how to approach from angles that minimized exposure to defensive fire. They knew that American bomber crews were terrified, exhausted young men flying missions that their own commanders privately considered suicide runs. The cruel irony was that America had the industrial capacity to build better fighters. Factories across the nation were producing aircraft at rates that amazed the world, but producing fighters wasn't the problem. Producing fighters that could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back? That seemed impossible. The fuel requirements alone appeared insurmountable. Current fighters carried maybe 300 gallons of fuel. Flying to Berlin and back required over 600 miles each way. Add combat maneuvering, and you needed range that simply didn't exist in 1943 fighter design. This was the world the P-51 Mustang entered, and almost everyone agreed it was a disappointment. The Mustang's origin story reads like a comedy of desperate improvises. In 1940, the British needed fighters immediately. Their factories couldn't keep pace with combat losses during the Battle of Britain. They approached North American aviation with a proposal. "Could you build us Curtiss P-40 fighters under license?" North Americans' response was audacious. "We can design and build you a better fighter in the same time frame." The British were skeptical but desperate enough to gamble. North American delivered on an almost impossible promise, designing the Mustang from scratch and producing a flying prototype in just 102 days. That kind of speed was unheard of in aircraft development. The first Mustangs reached British squadrons in 1942. Pilots immediately noticed something remarkable. Below 15,000 feet, this aircraft was magnificent, fast, maneuverable, responsive. It could outrun and outfight German fighters in low-altitude combat. The laminar flow wing design gave it speed that surprised enemy pilots used to catching British fighters easily. But there was a problem that seemed fatal. Above 15,000 feet, where most aerial combat actually happened, the Mustang's Allison engine gasped for air like a drowning man. Its performance fell off a cliff, slower, sluggish, unable to climb effectively. German fighters operating at 20,000 to 30,000 feet could easily destroy Mustangs that ventured into their altitude range. The U.S. Army Air Forces tested the early Mustangs and reached a damning conclusion. Good for low-altitude reconnaissance and ground attack. Useless for high-altitude bomber escort, which was the mission that actually mattered. The Mustang got assigned to secondary duties, flying low-level missions that kept it away from the high-altitude combat where America desperately needed fighter superiority. Military planners wrote it off. Just another fighter that looked promising but couldn't deliver where it counted. The planes that would win the air war would have to come from somewhere else. But one man looked at the Mustang's failure and saw something nobody else recognized. Sometimes the problem isn't the aircraft, sometimes it's just the engine. Ronald Harker was a test pilot for Rolls-Royce, the British company that built the legendary Merlin engine powering Spitfires and Hurricanes. In April 1942, Harker flew a Mustang equipped with the disappointing Allison engine. His report contained a sentence that would change aviation history. If this aircraft was fitted with a Merlin engine, it would be a world beater. The suggestion seemed almost too simple. The Mustang's airframe was brilliant. Its laminar flow wing design was aerodynamically superior to almost any fighter in the sky. Its range potential was enormous because the fuselage could hold more fuel than typical fighters. The problem was purely the engine's inability to perform at high altitude. The Merlin engine solved that problem through supercharging technology that maintained power output even in the thin air. Above 20,000 feet, Rolls-Royce had spent years perfecting two-stage supercharging, essentially compressing air twice before feeding it into the engine. This meant consistent power from sea level to 30,000 feet. Matching the Merlin to the Mustang airframe created something unprecedented. The efficient laminar flow wing meant less drag. Less drag meant the same fuel load could carry the aircraft farther. The powerful Merlin meant devastating performance at the altitudes where bomber escort missions happened. Suddenly, the range and altitude requirements that seemed impossible became achievable. But bureaucracy moved slowly, even during wartime. Getting approval to modify an aircraft that had already been dismissed as a failure took persuasion and patience. British engineers began the conversion first, installing Merlin engines in a few Mustangs for testing. The results were so dramatic that even skeptics couldn't dismiss them. American officials finally authorized Packard, which built Merlins under license in the United States, to begin producing Merlin-powered Mustangs. The designation changed to P-51B. This wasn't just an upgrade. It was a complete transformation of the aircraft's capabilities and mission. The first test flights of the Merlin-powered Mustang produced results so extraordinary that pilots questioned their instruments. Top speed over 440 miles per hour, combat ceiling above 40,000 feet, range with drop tanks exceeding 1,600 miles. The same airframe that had been dismissed as useless for high-altitude combat was now the fastest, highest-flying, longest-range fighter in the American arsenal. But numbers on paper meant nothing until the aircraft proved itself in combat. In December 1943, the first P-51Bs reached England and joined the 8th Air Force. Bomber crews who had watched friends die for months regarded the new fighters with cautious hope mixed with deep skepticism. They'd seen plenty of aircraft that looked good in training, but failed when German cannons started firing. The Mustang's first major test came in early 1944 during escort missions into Germany. What happened shocked everyone, including now the Luftwaffe. American fighters that could stay with the bombers all The way to the target and back? Impossible. German pilots had built their entire tactical doctrine around the assumption that Allied escorts had to turn back. Suddenly, that assumption was killing them. Luftwaffe fighters that dove on bomber formations expecting easy kills found themselves facing Mustangs that could match their speed, outturn their maneuvers, and chase them all the way back to their bases. German pilots who had dominated the skies over their homeland suddenly faced a fighter that was faster, could climb with them, and most importantly, wasn't going to run out of fuel and abandon the fight. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. German fighter pilots had enjoyed a crucial advantage, fighting over their own territory with fuel to spare while American escorts operated at their maximum range. The Mustang eliminated that advantage. Now, every fight happened on equal terms, and American pilots had been training intensively while German training programs were being cut due to fuel shortages. But the Mustang's impact went beyond individual dogfights. The presence of long-range escorts fundamentally changed the strategic bombing campaign. Bomber crews who had expected to die now had a realistic chance of survival. Loss rates began falling dramatically. By spring 1944, the aerial war over Germany had transformed from an American nightmare into a Luftwaffe catastrophe. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Mustang was the reason why. German fighter pilots faced an impossible dilemma. Their mission was to destroy American bombers before they could devastate German cities and factories. But attacking the bombers meant engaging their Mustang escorts, and engaging Mustangs at high altitude was increasingly suicidal. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots who had survived years of combat were being shot down by American pilots who had been flying fighters for less than a year. The mathematics of aerial combat had reversed completely. In 1943, Germany was shooting down Allied aircraft faster than factories could replace them. By mid-1944, America was destroying German fighters faster than Germany could train replacement pilots. The Mustang wasn't just winning fights. It was achieving air superiority through systematic annihilation of enemy capabilities. American fighter tactics evolved to maximize the Mustang's advantages. Some Mustangs stayed close to the bombers, providing immediate protection. Others ranged ahead and to the sides, hunting for German fighters before they could organize attacks. Still others deliberately targeted Luftwaffe airfields, catching German fighters during their most vulnerable moments, takeoff and landing. This aggressive approach transformed the mission from defensive escort to offensive fighter sweep. Mustang pilots weren't just protecting bombers anymore. They were actively hunting down and destroying the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found. German fighters trying to land after attacking bombers found Mustangs waiting at their own airfields, turning what should have been safe havens into death traps. The impact on German fighter pilot morale was catastrophic. These were men who had conquered Poland, France, and much of the Soviet Union through air superiority. They had shot down thousands of Allied aircraft. Now they were being systematically destroyed by an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once, flying a fighter that could outperform anything Germany could field. Luftwaffe commanders tried various countermeasures. They developed new tactics, introduced faster fighters, concentrated forces for overwhelming attacks. Nothing worked consistently against Mustangs flown by increasingly confident American pilots. The statistical evidence of the Mustang's dominance became overwhelming and undeniable. Between December 1943 and May 1945, P-51 Mustangs destroyed approximately 4,950 enemy aircraft in aerial combat. This represented more air-to-air kills than any other Allied fighter in the European theater. But the numbers only told part of the story. Bomber loss rates provided even more dramatic evidence. Before Mustang escorts became standard, bomber missions into Germany often suffered loss rates exceeding 10%. Some particularly brutal raids lost 20% or more of the attacking force. Those numbers were unsustainable. They meant bomber crews had virtually no chance of surviving the required 25 missions. After Mustangs began providing deep escort in early 1944, bomber loss rates dropped below 2% on most missions. Some raids penetrated deep into Germany and returned without losing a single bomber. The men who flew those missions understood exactly what that meant. The Mustang was saving their lives every single day. The transformation enabled the systematic destruction of Germany's industrial capacity. Oil refineries, ball-bearing factories, aircraft production facilities all became vulnerable to precision bombing because bombers could now reach them and return safely. Germany's war economy, which had withstood earlier bombing campaigns, began crumbling under the weight of sustained, protected aerial assault. German fighter production actually increased through 1944, but it didn't matter. Factories could build fighters faster than training schools could produce qualified pilots, and even when pilots completed training, they often died on their first or second missions against experienced American pilots flying superior aircraft. The Mustang also proved remarkably versatile beyond bomber escort. It excelled at ground attack, destroying German trains, vehicles, and supply depots. Its long range meant it could penetrate deep into German-controlled territory, disrupting logistics and communications far from the front lines. Its speed and firepower made it deadly against everything from locomotives to tanks. By late 1944, Luftwaffe fighters avoided combat whenever possible. Their mission had shifted from destroying Allied bombers to simply surviving encounters with Allied fighters. The success of the Mustang created unprecedented demand. North American aviation's factories worked around the clock to meet orders that seemed to increase every week. By war's end, over 15,000 P-51s had been produced, transforming North American aviation from a relatively small manufacturer into one of America's premier aircraft builders. The production achievement was as revolutionary as the aircraft itself. Building fighters at this scale, while maintaining quality control and incorporating continuous improvements, required manufacturing innovations that would influence aviation production for decades. North American developed assembly line techniques specifically for fighter aircraft, methods that balanced speed with precision. Different variants emerged to meet specific mission requirements. The P-51D, introduced in 1944, featured a bubble canopy that gave pilots unprecedented visibility. This seemingly simple change dramatically improved combat effectiveness by eliminating blind spots that enemy fighters had exploited. The bubble canopy P-51D became the most produced variant, with over 8,000 built. Other refinements followed: better armament, improved fuel systems, more effective radios, upgraded gun sights. Each change represented lessons learned in combat, feedback from pilots who flew the missions and knew exactly what they needed to survive and win. This constant evolution kept the Mustang ahead of German fighters even as the Luftwaffe introduced newer, theoretically more advanced designs. The aircraft that had started as a desperation project completed in 102 days had become the standard against which all other fighters were measured. Allied air forces around the world wanted Mustangs. The Royal Air Force, which had initially rejected the Allison-powered version, became one of the Mustang's biggest advocates after experiencing the Merlin variant's performance. Even the Soviet Union, which rarely praised Western equipment, requested Mustangs through Lend-Lease. Stalin's Air Force had excellent fighters of their own, but they recognized the Mustang's unique combination of range and performance. Some were delivered, though most American production went to the European and Pacific theaters where they were desperately needed. The Mustang's success validated a design philosophy: start with an excellent airframe, match it with the right engine, and continuously improve based on combat experience. When the war ended in May 1945, the Mustang had accomplished something unprecedented in aviation history. An aircraft that had been written off as a failure had become the fighter that won air superiority over Europe. The plane nobody wanted had destroyed the Luftwaffe, but the Mustang's impact extended far beyond World War II victory. It fundamentally changed how air forces thought about fighter design and mission planning. Range was no longer negotiable. Any future fighter would need sufficient range to escort bombers, patrol vast areas, or strike deep into enemy territory. The Mustang had proven that fighters could dominate battlefields hundreds of miles from their bases. The aircraft continued serving long after Germany surrendered. Mustangs fought in Korea, providing close air support and engaging early jet fighters with surprising success. The combination of reliability, firepower, and pilot visibility made it effective even against more technologically advanced opponents. Some air forces flew Mustangs into the 1980s, a testament to the design's fundamental soundness. Today, the P-51 Mustang remains one of the most recognizable aircraft ever built. Its distinctive profile, the sound of its Merlin engine, and its combat record have made it an icon of American air power. Restored Mustangs perform at air shows worldwide, thrilling audiences with demonstrations of the speed and agility that made them dominant 75 years ago. The legacy lives on in every long-range fighter that followed. Modern air superiority fighters trace their conceptual lineage to the Mustang's proof that range and performance could coexist. The strategic principle that the Mustang validated, that controlling the air enables everything else in modern warfare, remains fundamental to military doctrine. From rejected failure to legendary warrior, the Mustang's journey proves that sometimes the most revolutionary weapons are already waiting to be discovered. They just need someone willing to see past conventional wisdom and recognize potential that others missed. If you have stories about the P-51 or other World War II aircraft, share them below. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My friend who is a commercial pilot said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories about airlines and the realities of modern travel like this deserve to be told. Help me show her that these videos matter. Please subscribe to the channel and let's keep these stories from being buried.